Handling a chainsaw is serious business. With engines that can rev up to 12,000 RPM and razor-sharp cutters moving at over 100 feet per second, the chainsaw is a tool to be treated with respect. Even though it's built to be safe if you know what you're doing, the chainsaw can cause terrible injuries when accidents happen. In this program, we'll show you how to reduce the risk of chainsaw accidents by looking at the issues, by showing you how to handle the saw, and by explaining the reasons why it's got to be done that way. The first thing we'll look at is picking the right saw for the job. There's a lot of different saws out there. What kind of saw should you choose? Well, there's basically 3 different levels to consider. First, if you only use the saw around the yard or cottage, you'll need a smaller saw, say under 40 cc's with about a 10 to 14 inch bar. These saws are light and easy to handle, and they come with all the safety features of the big saws, plus a special chain with guard links that cut down the chances of a kickback, probably the worst of all possible chainsaw accidents. If you're doing high-risk jobs like pruning trees or cutting branches, you can even get a tip guard that makes a kickback all but impossible. At the second level, if you're doing heavier work like removing trees or cutting firewood, you'll be better off with a saw in the 40 to 60 cc range. These saws are heavier and more powerful, and the bars are generally 16 or 18 inches long. But the big difference is the chain. It's designed to take a larger chip with each pass through the wood. A lot of loggers choose saws at the high end of this range for cutting pulpwood or smaller timber. The third level is the heavy-duty saws made for cutting big timber on a professional basis. With engines starting at 60 cc's and up to over 100, with bars that start at 24 inches, and chains designed strictly for cutting, these saws are heavy, they can be hard to handle, and you should choose one only if that's what you really need. But whatever the saw you choose, they all come with one really important piece of safety equipment, an owner's manual. The owner's manual gives you information that you can't find anywhere else. Things like the gas-oil mixture, how to set the choke and throttle for starting, and how to keep the saw up to factory specs. Study the manual before you start, and keep it handy in case you need it again later for things like part numbers or carb settings. Whatever the job and whatever the saw you use, you'll have to give it a good inspection before you start work. This is especially important, of course, if different people use the same saw, or if it hasn't been used for a while. To begin with, check your safety features. Check the chain catcher, the handles and the handguard, and try the throttle safety latch to make sure it locks out the trigger. And dry test the brake to see if it snaps on and off smoothly, and if it locks the chain. Then, look the bar and chain over for damage, and check the chain tension. It should fit snugly to the bar. It must run smoothly, but it must not sag. There's one more thing you have to be sure of, the sharpening of the chain itself. If you're not sure if the chain was sharpened right, you'll have to double check. Use the file guide to check the cutter angles, and use the depth gauge tool to check the depth gauges. Fuel up the saw outside, away from sources of ignition, and fill the chain oil tank at the same time. Before you start any work, you need your PPE, your personal protective equipment. Wear your hard hat to protect your head from falling branches and other debris. A face shield that attaches to your hard hat will protect your face from flying wood chips, and safety glasses protect your eyes. Earmuffs that attach to your hard hat will protect your hearing. Special Kevlar or ballistic nylon chainsaw pants or chaps will give your legs protection. They're designed to reduce the chance of a cut-through and to bring the chain to a stop if you accidentally let the saw touch your leg. The same goes for your hands. Use chainsaw gloves with cut-resistant padding on the left or forward hand. And finally, guard your feet with chainsaw boots. They come in summer and winter types, and they have steel toe caps and cut-resistant insteps, as well as a good slip-proof lug pattern on the sole. Of course, all your PPE should be in good shape and up to the latest standards set by the Canada Standards Association. And you have to follow the directions for proper fit and maintenance of your protective equipment. If you're new to wearing PPE, you might find that it feels strange and a bit awkward at first. But wear all your PPE all the time, and it'll soon become second nature. Carry the saw with the bar pointing back in case you stumble, and bring it as close to the work area as possible so as to avoid walking with the engine running. There are two safe ways to start a chainsaw. Put the saw on solid, level ground and make sure there's nothing in the way of the bar tip. Place your foot into the rear handle of the saw, then set the choke and throttle. Hold the forward handle with your left hand and lock your elbow in the straight arm position. Next, take the starter cord in your right hand and pull it out just a little until you feel the starter mechanism engage. Then pull the cord until the engine starts. Next, adjust the choke and throttle and let the saw warm up. Then make sure that it'll idle without moving the chain. If the chain runs with the saw idling, or if the saw won't idle at all, you need to have it serviced. When you're working with a warm saw, there's a second starting method that's fast and easy. Clamp the saw between your thighs so the rear handle locks behind your knee. Hold the forward handle with your left hand, the thumb wrapped under the bar, the elbow locked. Then grasp the starter cord and start the engine. Next, check that the oiler is working. Rev the engine over a clean surface. You should see a fine spray of oil. If you don't, your oiler ports may be plugged, or you may need other service. Finally, do a power test of your chain brake. Rev the engine up until the chain is running and engage the brake. It should stop the chain in a fraction of a second. Before you begin cutting, check the work area. Make sure people are clear of the danger zone and look out for hazards like power lines, rocks, or dead trees and branches that could fall. Make sure that you can see what you're planning to cut and that you have good solid footing. Stand at an angle to the work and just to the left, making sure that your feet are well clear of the cut. Start cutting under full throttle and cut with the middle of the bar, never the tip. Let the saw feed itself into the wood. You don't have to push. As you finish each cut, make sure that you don't cut into the ground. If you do, you'll probably have to resharpen the chain on the spot. Ease off on the throttle just as you finish a cut, and always be ready in case the wood swings or rolls when it breaks free. Stay in balance. Remember, don't reach out with the saw. Keep it close to your body and move your feet to get closer to the work. Carry the saw in front of you with both hands anytime the engine is running. If you're going to take more than a few steps, use the brake. And if you're going to walk any distance, cross rough ground, or climb over anything, turn the engine off. To stay in full control of your saw, you have to know how the wood is going to react to the forces from your saw. As you see in this example, the saw tries to pull forward when you cut with the bottom of the bar, and the wood will roll towards you. But when you're cutting with the top of the bar, it's the other way around, and the saw will push back while the wood tries to roll away if it can. Push and pull really come into play if you're trying to cut a small piece of wood. A piece of firewood, for example, can easily hit you in the shin if you're not careful. Tension and compression are two more things that you have to deal with on practically every cut you make. Here's how it works. When a log or tree is supported at both ends, it'll sag in the middle. This compresses the wood at the top and stretches it at the bottom. Now, if you were to try to cut through that log in one sweep, you'll find that the cut would get pinched shut and that your saw would get stuck. To prevent this, you have to make the cut in two stages. First, make a cut from the top or compression side and pull the saw out before the cut starts to close up. Then, finish cutting from the bottom, or tension side. If the wood is supported at one end, however, the tension and compression sides are reversed. The wood will be stretched at the top and compressed at the bottom. In that case, start the cut from the bottom and pull the saw out before it can get pinched. Then, finish the cut from the top. Remember, the order of the cuts is the same. Compression side first, tension side second. The most serious hazard you'll face using a chainsaw is kickback. Kickback can happen when the top corner of the bar tip contacts solid wood. The saw will be thrown with great force, and it may swing back and around and strike your legs, your chest, or your neck and face. In some cases, like when the top of the bar gets pinched while you're cutting wood, the saw may be pushed straight back. You could be knocked down, or your left hand could be torn from the handle and onto the bar. Here's how kickback works. When the tip of the bar touches the wood, the cutters at that point are moving forward and down at the same time. At that angle, they can dig straight into the wood, and sometimes a cutter will dig in so deep that it gets stuck and slams the whole chain to a stop in relation to the wood. What happens next is that the energy of the moving chain is transferred to the saw and in the opposite direction, with the result that all the energy that was driving the chain is now driving the saw back at you. There are a number of steps that you can take, that you must take, to prevent kickbacks. First, there's the sharpening and maintenance we talked about earlier. Those cutter filing angles and those depth gauge settings have everything to do with preventing kickback. Second, there's safe handling, keeping a solid two-handed grip on your saw all the time, wrapping your thumb under the forward handle, locking your left elbow and standing just to the left of the work, never reaching out to cut, and never cutting above shoulder height. But most important of all, you have to keep control of the saw. Make sure you can see what you're cutting and keep that top corner of the bar from ever coming into contact with wood. Right after you finish cutting for the day is the best time to clean, sharpen, and maintain your saw. That will stop any caked sawdust, dirt, or oil from hardening inside the saw, and it means that the saw will always be ready the next time you need it. Use the techniques for sharpening and cleaning that are discussed in the next program in this series, Saw Chain Sharpening and Maintenance. We've just looked at many of the most important considerations in safe chainsaw handling. We've looked at choosing the right saw for the job and making sure that your saw is safe and ready. We've looked at personal protective equipment, at what it takes to prevent a kickback, and at some of the things you have to know to use a chainsaw safely. Now it's up to you to use what you've learned, to use your owner's manual, to use the other programs in this series, and to use your common sense and good judgment to develop the safe working practices that will become safe working habits.